A gute Woche. Today was Yud Dalet Kislev, 14 days in the month of Kislev. This is the day of the Rebbe's anniversary. This is the day that the Rebbe got married. That's why you notice that throughout the Farbrengen, the Nigunim which were sung today were basically all Chasen Nigunim, Samach to Samach, or on Shabbos, and so forth. In fact, the Maimer today, which the Rebbe said, was also based on the Maimer which begins on Shabbos, Sosim v'Simcha, Chosam v'Kala, which was said by the Frierdiker Rebbe at the time of the Rebbe's wedding. And this Maimer, based on that Maimer, the Rebbe said today the Maimer. Just being that we're talking about the date of Yud Dalet Kislev, 14 days in Kislev, the day the Rebbe married, it's a very interesting expression from the Rebbe. And the Farbrengen, also in the Yud Dalet Kislev Farbrengen, when it was 25 years of the Rebbe's marriage, the Rebbe expressed himself then in a Farbrengen, in Tafshin Yud Dalet, that this is the day, der Tag, verbindt mich mit Chsidim. It is through this day that he has his shayches with Chsidim. It's a very interesting expression. Now let us go a little bit to the Farbrengen.
What did the Rebbe mean by that?
Very simple what the Rebbe meant by it. It's because of this day that the Rebbe has his shayches to Chsidim. The Rebbe is the Rebbe and we are his Chsidim. It is through that day.
The day he got married.
The Rebbe began to Farbrengen today that it is Shabbos Parshas Vayishlach. And Vayishlach, this is the title of the Sedra. Even though in the Sedra many inyanim are discussed, but when we want to refer to the Sedra, we refer to it as Parshas Vayishlach. Actually, this is a way of identifying the Sedra. We must have some sort of a name, some sort of a way to be able to identify the Sedra. So the name of this week's Sedra is Vayishlach. What is the Taich Vayishlach? Right away brings out the thought of Shlichus. He was sent. This comes in continuation to last week's Sedra. And last week's Sedra in Vayetze, we also discussed the inyan of Shlichus. There it was the beginning of the Shlichus which Yaakov went when he was sent by Yitzchak. Now in today's Sedra we have the inyan of Vayishlach Yaakov, which is Yaakov is sending Malachim, Yaakov is sending messengers to Esav. But again the Sedra is stressing the word of Vayishlach. What is the inyan of Vayishlach? Shlichus. Here the Rebbe went right away into the inyan, how every Yid is a shliach, every Yid is an emissary, every Yid was sent on shlichus. Who were we sent on shlichus from? We were sent on shlichus from the Rabbeinu Shalom. The Rebbe sent each and every one of us on the shlichus, and we are to fulfill this mission. And just like the Gemara says regarding the shlichus, the Gemara uses the expression Shluchoi shel Adam kemoisai. If one appoints an emissary that he should be his emissary to take care of something, it is as if the one who has sent him is taking care of it. In other words, the person who represents him has the same authority as the one who sent him, who appointed him. So the same when we are talking about the shlichus, which every Yid has, and every Yid is a shliach of the Rebbe. Just like the pasuk says, Zeh Sefer Toldos Adam. Which the meaning of it is, this is the Sefer of the Toldos of the birth of all the details of Adam. But Taicht it, Zeh Sefer Toldos Adam, meaning that every Adam, every person is compared to a Sefer Torah. And just like a Sefer Torah, we understand, also comes from heaven, from high heaven, and a Sefer Torah came down here. So this is also the concept of Shlichus, which the Sefer Torah came from very, very high, and is an expression from the Alter Rebbe in Tanya. Mishom, Nosa, V'yorda, from very high, Torah came down very, very low, until we have it the way we have access to Torah, and Torah is written in ink on paper, and we could all read it, and we could all understand it. The very same way, we can compare the neshama of every Yid which came down on a shlichus into this world, a Vayishlach, a shlichus from the Rabbeinu Shalom. Just like regarding Torah, we say, what is the inyan of Torah? So it's brought out in Chassidus that there are two inyanim which are accomplished through learning Torah. One inyan is that Torah nitna, Torah was given, Lasei Shalom Ba'ilam. By learning Torah, Torah creates peace in the world. Another inyan which we have through learning Torah is the fact that Torah creates a dira lo yizbarech. Torah creates a residence for the Eibishter here on this world. So the same way the shlichus of every Yid is also to accomplish these inyanim, to accomplish a dira lo yizbarech, to accomplish a residence for the Eibishter on this world. What is the plus, the advantage when we are using the expression dira, a residence? So the Rebbe continues. We know that there are oilamos, there are many, many worlds. There are general categories, there are the four worlds of Tzilus, Bria, Yitzira, Asiya, and then as it's explained in Svarim, Chassidus, and Kabbalah, that there are many, many levels of worlds. However, when we are talking about the madrega of a world, a oilam, any oilam we should only talk about, we still call it oilam. And what is the taich of oilam? Chassidus tells us, oilam is miloshen helam. Oilam is always a cover-up. In other words, we don't really get godliness, getlichkeit, as it really is. There is always a cover on the revelation of godliness which may appear in any level we may be talking about. Some more, some there's a stronger cover, a bigger helem, some there is less of a helem, but still the concept of a helem exists. When we're talking about a dira lo yizborech, what is the taich dira? A residence. Just like when we're talking about a palace for a king. What's the pshat, a palace for a king? A palace for a king, the king lives there. And the king is there entirely. To such an extent that not only is he there in his clothing, but he's even there at times when a person lives in his own house, in his own residence, in his own apartment, there are times when he has to take off his clothes. That shows that the melech is there, the person is there entirely without any cover-ups. On the contrary, this is where he is fully. The same when we're talking, what is created through one shlichus? Every Yid has his shlichus. What is the shlichus of a Yid? The shlichus of a Yid is Lasois lo yizbarech dira b'tachtonim, to make this world, that the world should be a suitable residence for the Eibishter. And this shlichus applies to each and every person, regardless of what madrege he is in. Because here we are talking in a level where it's not shayach differences of madreges. When we are talking in oilamois, in worlds there's a higher oilam and there's a lower oilam. So there's an oilam where there's more revelation of godliness, and there's an oilam where there's less gilui elokus, less revelation of godliness. Being that we're talking how every Yid is capable lasis lo yizbarach dira b'tachtonim, to make for the Eibishter a dira, a residence here in this world, so every Yid can do it equally, because just like as far as the residence of the Eibishter's relevance, the Eibishter revealing himself in this world, it's not a question of a higher madrega or a lower madrega. It's not measured by levels. It's not measured by madregas. It's the fact that this Gashmistic world becomes a dira lo yizbarach, as we just explained how a melech acts in his dira. This is where he lives in. The same when we're talking about accomplishing this, every Yid is b'koyach to accomplish it equally. This is a koyach which the Eibishter gave to everyone, and everyone can achieve this. Here the Rebbe went into another inyan. In Shabbos we find, look at the malachas of Shabbos, we know there are 39 things which we are 39 malachas which we are prohibited to do on Shabbos. One of them is, in Gemara it's called makeh bepatish. The simple taich of makeh bepatish would mean a bang with a hammer. A patish is a hammer. However, when we're talking about it in regard to a malacha of Shabbos, it means when a job has to be finished and he does the final touch of the job, that's called makeh bepatish. The Rebbeinu Shalom also did the makeh bepatish, the final touch of creating the world, that was done right before Shabbos began. The Rebbe finished the world within 6 days, and finished in its completeness, that we consider the world finally created. This is called the Makeh B'Patish. When was this? Shabbos, the Rebbe rested. Shabbos is a day of rest. So Mamela we say it's a day of rest for us because the Rebbe rested from creating the world. When was the final stage of creating the world? When was the world finished in its creation? This was right before the entrance of Shabbos. Mamela, there is a melacha which is called Makeh B'Patish. Now the Rebbe
What was that?
Makeh B'Patish means on any job which has to be done, there is the final bang with the hammer, which is the final completion of the job. Now the Rebbe says, regarding melachas of Shabbos, all melachas have a shia, a quantity. When is it considered that one was over on one of the melachas of Shabbos? For example, carrying. What is considered carrying? So, al pi halacha, there's a certain quantity which goes into the category of the isser min ha-Torah, when it is asr min ha-Torah to carry. He has to carry a certain weight, a certain amount, a certain shia. And the same applies to all the other malachas as well, starting from the very first one. If one plows, if one does field work, if one cuts, if he writes. For example, writing. Writing, the Gemara tells us what's considered writing on Shabbos. So the Gemara gives us the rule, shtei oisiyos. It has to be 2 letters. Now let us not mistake it that it means that 1 letter is permissible to write. That's called, here we go into a different concept altogether, something which is called chatzi shia. Half of the shia we are also not allowed to do, which is also considered an issa. The Gemara discusses whether it's asa min ha-Torah or it's asa min ha-Rabbanan. Even if it's asa min ha-Torah, a punishment and einish is only given once one did the malacha with the complete shia, which is, in our case, when we're talking, for example, about writing, that he wrote 2 oisiyos on Shabbos. But again, it does not mean that it's permitted to write a dot even, or 1 letter. Goes without say, definitely not. But the Isser min ha-Torah, that he should be worthy, he should deserve an einish, deserve a punishment, that is when he wrote 2 letters, 2 oisiyos. However, regarding this melacha of Makeh B'Patish, here there's an exception. Makeh B'Patish has no shia. There is no quantity to the melacha of Makeh B'Patish. Any little bang he gave, if this is the final touch to the melacha, to the job, to the overall job, that's considered Makeh B'Patish. The same the Rebbe says, we have the Makeh B'Patish spiritually. The final touch, here the Rebbe says we constantly keep on demanding from every one of us that this is a special year. It's a year of Hakel, it's a year of Tismach. Rebbe says, referring to himself, he says there's a wild person, a wilder Yid, who constantly keeps on talking that we have to expect Mashiach immediately. And he said the same a few years ago, and then he said it a while later, and he still keeps on saying it. And this wild person doesn't get tired, and he keeps on constantly demanding and screaming that we have to hope for the coming of Mashiach, and Mashiach is about to come. What does this mean? That we have to keep on doing things which will bring Mashiach. We have to keep on doing Hakel things. We have to keep on doing inyanim of Tismach, of which this year demands. It's a very special year. Why? Because we could never know. Perhaps this specific thing which we are doing now, this may be the Makeh B'Patish, the final bang with the hammer. This may be the final thing which will lead to the coming of Mashiach. Or the Rebbe explained the same idea from a different angle. There's a famous expression in behalf of the Frierdiker Rebbe, which Frierdiker Rebbe repeated in behalf of the Baal Shem Tov, that a neshama comes down onto this world for 80 years, and the reason of the neshama is coming down into this world may be to do one favor, one gashmistic favor from one Jew to another Jew. What does this mean? It means that the Makeh B'Patish, the final bang, the final move of this neshama is coming down into this world is that specific favor which the neshama had done to help another Jew, doing a tova, doing a favor to help another Jew. However, this is the inyan of shlichus, Vayishlach, and this comes in continuation to last week's Sedre, and this also has a shaykhs to next week's Sedre. Next week's Sedre is Vayeshev. What is Vayeshev? So Rashi tells us, Bikesh Yaakov leishev b'shalva. Yaakov wanted to sit in peace. So the problem with Yosef began. However, we notice the Rebbe says that all of these three Sedres start with a Vav. If we were to add up 3 Vavs, 3 times 6, we get 18. What is the inyan of 18? Chai. Regarding Yaakov Avinu, the Gemara tells us, Yaakov Avinu loy meis. Yaakov Avinu did not die. Famous Gemara. As the Gemara continues, what does it mean he did not die? Gemara says the Torah tells us he did die. The Torah tells us everything which was done to him after his death. All the details of his funeral the Torah tells us. How can we say Yaakov Avinu loy meis? So the Gemara continues, Ma zaroi b'chayim, afhu b'chayim. If his children are alive, this considers it like he would also be alive. What does it mean, Ma zaroi b'chayim? So the Rebbe explained it many occasions already, that when his children go on his path and fulfill the wish of Yaakov, it's considered that Yaakov is alive. And Mele here, when we're talking about Vayishlach Yaakov, this is today's Seder. So when the Shlichus is done with a Lebedikite, the Shlichus is done properly, but naturally the Shlichus has to be done not in a mood of Gaive, not with an expression of Gaive, because regarding the Bal Gaive, we know that what the Gemara tells us, that the Rebbeinu Shalom says, Ein ani v'hu yechaylam l'adol, that the Rebishter and the Bal Gaive cannot live together. So Mamela Shlichus has to be done in a mood of Dako, Shval Ruach, in a mood of Anivis, modesty, humble. And then we are successful in the Shlichus, and the Shlichus then has an eternal kiyum. This is the inyan of Chai, this is the inyan of Lebedikite, which we get from the 3 Vavs, and we finally wind up like the beginning of the next week's Sedra, that we, from the Shlichus, we come to the Leishev B'Shalva, we come to a setting of peacefulness. When will this be? This will be through the coming of Mashiach. Then the Rebbe continued, this is regarding the Sedra. Sedra, and the name of the Sedra. Though in the Sedra, as he mentioned earlier, many inyanim are included, however, this name of Vayishlach, this is a general title for the entire Sedra. And he explained this title, and he explained this also with an expression of Reb Sadia Goen. Reb Sadia Goen says, Ha'etzem, kisha'ata toifes b'miktsasoi, ata toifes b'kuloi. This is an expression which is often quoted in Chassidus. When we gain control of the essence of something, even we have part of the essence does not let itself be divided in parts. Therefore, when we gain control of it, even we have control of part, even we are holding on to part, it is as if we have as if we are holding on to the entire thing. Memele, when we're talking about Vayishlach, even though it's one word of the Sedra, but this one word is a title to the entire Sedra. Rebbe brought in here another example. We know there's a famous Medrash, Chazal. The Chazal refer to the vision how the 6,000 years of the world are. So the first 2,000 years are Toihu. The second 2,000 years are Torah. And the last 2,000 years is Yemei HaMashiach. Even though we're talking on such a large span of 2,000 years. 2,000 years is a very big period. And we say 2,000 years of Torah. It's a very general description. It's not a detailed description, because we're talking about 2,000 years, and we want to describe, if you want to refer more in detail which of the 2,000 years you are referring to, this description is not helping us. But on the other hand, this is a general title for the 2,000 years, because 2,000 years of Torah, 2,000 years of Yemei HaMashiach, again in a very general term. The same when we're talking about a title of a Sedra, it's also a a title to the many, many inyanim which are discussed in the Sedra. But besides being the Sedra of Vayishlach, it is also the 14th day of the month, and we are already in the afternoon of the 14th day of the month, which means we are about to enter the 15th day. Which this is the inyan of Kaima Sihara Bashli Musa. The Lavana is in its completeness. When is the Lavana in its completeness? This is on the 15th day of the month. What does this mean to us as far as a hira, as far as a lesson? What do we derive from the fact of Kaima Sihara Bashli Musa, that we're about to enter the 15th of the month? In fact, when it's already 14 days and something, the Rebbe explains how it is, how the Chodesh is. A Chodesh of Lavana, a Chodesh of the moon, is not full 30 days. The Rambam explains it's 29 days and something. So really, when we are on the 14th day, especially we are on the latter part of the 14th day, it is already in the second half of the month. We're already in the part of the month of Kaim Mesiyah Rabash Limusa, when the Lavana is in its completeness. Memele, what is the inyan of the 15th of the month, Kaim Mesiyah Rabash Limusa, as far as we are concerned? The lesson of this, the Rebbe says, is a very simple one, and a very obvious one. The Lavana on the 15th day of the month, that's when it gives the most of its light. Strongest light is on the 15th. That's when the Lavana is complete, it's whole. Therefore, as far as we are concerned, we have to take from this day that the whole inyan of a Yid is lichtig zu machen, to make lichtig. And to make lichtig the strongest way possible, we have to reach out to all categories, to all levels, even reach out to Goyim, to see to it that the Goyim should fulfill the 7 mitzvahs of Bnei Noach, which they are obligated to fulfill. Reaching out to instill lichtigkeit in all parts of the world. This is, and also again, not to postpone it, and it has to be done right away. And here again, the Rebbe brought in here, this was the second sikha, the Rebbe brought in here also the idea of Makeh Bepatish, which means we can never know which move, which step, which we do, and that will be the step that will bring to the coming of Mashiach. Rebbe explained, Begashmi, as we see, when is the inyan of Makeh Bepatish used? For example, when there's differences of opinion between two people, and then comes somebody who is straightening out the two differences of opinion, and when he gives a bang with the hammer, he's a Makeh Bepatish. This kind of like closes the case, and this, in his opinion, and he is the one that kind of like straightens out the differences of opinion. In other words, Makeh Bepatish, this is a final step to close a matter, to close an inyan, to close a job, to close something when it becomes final and complete. That's the inyan of Makeh Bepatish. The Rebbe again concluded that all this will lead to the coming of Mashiach, and by us begging for the coming of Mashiach, screaming Ad Mosai, all of this adds to hasten the coming of Mashiach. And when we scream and when we sing, that the clapping should be, and then we clap with our hands. And here the Rebbe referred, there are those that because of Shabbos, the Rebbe has mentioned it already throughout the years a few times, that because of Shabbos, don't want to clap with their hands. Because they claim it's a shaila on Shabbos, whether we're allowed to bang our hands because we're creating a noise. So that's why they bang their hands on Shabbos this way. They bang it this way, so it's with a shinui, so it's different than the usual. So the Rebbe says, that is, the Rebbe once explained that al pi halacha also. I think the Rebbe once quoted from the Minchas Alaza, from the Munkacher, where he discusses it al pi halacha, and he also explains that it's no shaila whatsoever. And when Yidden gather to get a Shabbos and want to rejoice and are expressing simcha, then naturally simcha is also expressed through clapping with the hands, and there's no shaila in it whatsoever. The Rebbe today spoke about it in a derogatory way, like laughing from those people that when they want to express their joy on Shabbos, I think he used the expression "achan they" to them, that when they want to express their joy on Shabbos, they are hesitant and they don't clap their hands regular, but they clap their hands in an opposite way, one on the other.
You clap one finger or the back of one finger to the back of the other finger.
Yeah, it could be. Then the Rebbe continued in explaining Rashi's in this week's Sedre, as well as Rambam and the Shia Rambam of today. The Shia the Rambam, it's in the halachas of Malva V'Loive, halachas of loans. There's a very interesting halacha. In the halachas of loans, we know, Mara explains it, that there are two categories. There is what we would call a milva al peh, a category of a loan, a transaction of a loan. However, there is no document, there is no shtar written up on this regarding this loan, which means it's only oral. One Ruvain has lent Shimon $100, but he did not take his signature. He didn't make him sign on a piece of paper, on a promissory note, or anything like it. All that he did was he gave it to him, and it's based on al peh, orally, that he will pay him back. Then there's a concept of milva bishtar. Ruvain gave a loan to Shimon. He gave him a loan of $1,000. However, this was also recorded on a document. Now there is a halacha that when the milva, the loan was bishtar, based on a document, the person who took the loan does not have the money to pay. We can go after his fields. Not only can we go after his fields, but let us assume he possessed fields at the time of the loan. Now he sold these fields. We can go to the person, the buyer of those fields, confiscate the fields from him, and these fields will go back to the person who gave the loan in lieu of the money, because the one who took the loan does not have to pay. This is a very famous concept which is known in Gemara, and the Rambam brings it as well, and so forth. Now, question arises as follows. There was a loan which took place bishtar, which means with a document. This loan was paid back. Now when we write a loan, a note on a loan, we have to be very careful on the date, to make sure the date is an accurate date. Because as I just mentioned, being that this note gives so much power that we can go ahead and confiscate from fields which the person who took the loan has sold. However, we can only take from those fields that he sold after the date of the loan. So that's why the date on this document is very important. If we were to backdate it, even with 1 day, then what it may lead to is we will take away fields from people in an improper way. Because let's assume we backdated a week, and the loan taka took place a week later, and the person who was the loiva, the one who took the loan, sold fields during that week. What will happen is we will take those fields away from the people who bought them, shaloi kedin. Because when is there a lien on the field? Only when this field was sold after the loan has taken place. Now the Rambam portrays the halacha as follows. The Rambam portrays a halacha in a case where a shtar was written, and the person who lent the money, borrowed the money, paid back the loan already. Let's assume the shtar was written on the day of the 15th of Kislev. He took the loan on the 15th of Kislev in the morning, and 4 hours later, he paid back the loan. Comes a while later, he realizes he still needs the money. So he goes back to the person who lent him the money, and he says, I'm sorry, I need again money. The question is, could we use the same shtar again? Could the same document which was prepared on the first loan, now notice there's no problem with the date, because he's renewing the loan, the second loan, the same day when he took the first one, he had already paid it back. So the Rambam says he can't. The shtar cannot be used again. A shtar is valid for one loan only. Even though it's on the same day, we cannot use the shtar again. So let me raise the question this afternoon, why? If it's the same day, why can't the shtar After all, the loan is a loan, regardless. So why do we, we'll explain in a minute, why do we say that the shtar, if the shtar was used already for one loan, cannot be used for a second loan? So the Rebbe is explaining, we know, for example, the shtar, there are many shtaras, there are many documents in halacha. For example, there's a document of marriage. Document of marriage is a document which, through this document, the marriage gets into effect. Ha'isha niknes, what does the Mishnah tell us in the beginning of Kiddushin? Ha'isha niknes, one can be kind of a wife. Kiddushin can be in effect through three different ways: bekesef, bishtar, or bebiyah. So what we are concerned with now is shtar. Shtar, through a document, a shtar that is made up, this makes the effect of the Kiddush. The same the Rebbe learns, the shtar is what puts the legitimacy of the loan into effect. What makes the loan a loan, with all of the responsibilities that come with this loan, and as we just discussed, the shibudim and so forth, it is the shtar. Furthermore, let us imagine, if we just discussed how when the loan is made bishtar, we can go after the people who have bought fields from the person who lent the money. Let's assume they wrote a shtar and they forgot to mention this in the shtar. It wasn't mentioned. The halacha is achrayis, which means responsibility. Tos seifrenhu. We accept that this is just an error. It's an error of the sofer, of the scribe who prepared this document. And the achrayis, the responsibility, is still there. What does this show us? This shows us that there's a certain koyach, there's a certain power what a shtar possesses. And this power that a shtar has can be used, a shtar has it once and a shtar doesn't have it twice. Kind of like it, after using the shtar one time, the shtar does not have the strength to be effective again for another loan. That is why, because the shtar is what's really putting all of the details of the loan, all of the responsibilities surrounding the loan, it is the shtar that really puts it into effect. Therefore, once the shtar was used, this shtar is already a valid shtar. For one time. A second time, it has no power anymore to affect the loan again. That is why, even though the date is no problem, and because it's on the same day, if he is renewing the loan, he has to go ahead and make a new shtar. This is as far as the halacha in halachas of shtaros. Now the Rebbe says, we know that the Rebbe refers to a famous expression of the Rambam, that the whole idea of mitzvahs is liyasher hadeyos. It's an expression of the Rambam in the halachas of Tmura. The Rambam uses this expression, that the idea behind mitzvahs is to straighten out our views, our minds, our looks on things. Therefore the Rebbe says we have how the same meaning of the shtar, we have the same idea in the spiritual sense as well. What is the inyan of the shtar in the spiritual sense? Inyan of the shtar, what did we just discuss? The shtar creates a shibud. A shibud means a lien. That's what a shtar is. A responsibility. Now there is a responsibility from the Rebishter to Eden. And the responsibility from the Rebishter to Eden is Eden are in Golus, and it is his responsibility to take us out of Golus. The Rebishter has done this already once, when he took us out of Mitzrayim, but the Rebishter will do it again now, when he will take us out of Golus, the final Geula. A Geula such that we will never have a Golus again. We say in Kesef of Musaf, we say, Hengo alti yeschem, achris kivreishis. The end of Kesef. The Rebishter says, I am taking you out of Golus, I've taken you out of exile. Achris, the second time, the last time, kivreishis, like the first time. However, it is only kivreishis. Dake, meaning with a kaf hadimian, it can be compared to the first time, but really it is not like the first time. Why? You know the famous pasuk, Ki meitzeischa me'eretz Mitzrayim arenu niflois. That the niflois, the wonders and miracles which the Rebishter will do when he will take us out of this galus, are in no comparison to those miracles which he performed when he took us out of Mitzrayim. So we say, Take henga alte yeschem, the Rebishter is taking us out of galus. Achris, the second time, it's kivereshis. It can only be compared to the first time, but it's not exactly as it was the first time. In other words, a shtar that was used once cannot be used again. Same idea. The way he took us out of Golus one way, he can't take us out of Golus the second way. The first time he took us out of Golus one way, taking us out of Mitzrayim. Now he will take us out of Golus in a completely different way. The miracles and the Nisim and the Niflois are in no way any comparison. It'll be in a much different way. So this is the spiritual side of the halacha of the halachas of shtaris, how one shtar cannot be used again. In the Rashi, in the parsha which the Rebbe discussed today, the Rebbe discussed three different psukim. First one which the Rebbe discussed was the first pasuk after Sheni, where the pasuk uses the expression Vayolen Sham Balayla Hahu, that Yaakov slept over there on that night. See, the Rebbe discussed a matter which is based on diktuk, based on Hebrew grammar. We know that a word that finishes off with a hey is a word in the keva, a female expression in Hebrew. So if that's the case, Laila finishes off with a hey, and why does the pasuk follow it with an expression of hahu, which is lashon zacha? Pasuk should have used the expression balayla hahi, that night, but in the feminine expression. The Rebbe answered to this question very simply, even though we know that there are the words that finish with a hey are generally nikeva, feminine. However, we know in Lashon HaKodesh that there are exceptions. And one of the exceptions is in fact the word Laila. Even though it finishes with a hey, still it does not mean that it is a Lashon Nekeva. And therefore it can follow with the word Hahu. In fact, the Rebbe brought a pasuk in Megillas Esther, where we also have the word Laila, and the word Laila is followed with a zacha, with a masculine expression. Because again, Laila is an exception. There are other words as well that are exceptions, and Laila is one of them. Then we go weiter, we learn how Yaakov had the match with the Sori Shel Esav, with the Malach. The pasuk says, Vayevasa Yaakov levadoi, Yaakov was left alone, Vayeovek ish imoy, and somebody had a battle with him. So if we look into Rashi, we want to know the taich of the word Vayeovek. Someone had a battle with whom? With Yaakov. That is in Kapitel Lamed Beis Pasuk Chav Hey. So Rashi brings an interpretation from Menachem. Menachem Pirish. What does Menachem teach? That Vayeovek comes from the word avak, dust. What shaykhs does it have to this inyan? That while they were both in a match, they were both fighting, the Malach and Yaakov. So, by their moving themselves, their feet brought up dust. There was dust under them on the floor, and by them being heavily involved in this match, and Helu Ovok, it brought up dust. So this is a taich, which Rashi taiches brings here in the word Vayeovek, that Vayeovek has the word avak in it, and avak means dust. We know Rashi brings Chazals and Medrashim and Gemaras many times. But again, Rashi is only concerned with Pshuta Shel Mikra, that the child should understand the Pshat and the Pasuk. That is why Rashi is not getting involved in being an Oimer Dava B'Shem Oimroi, repeating something in the name of the Tana, the sage, or Amoira who said it. Rashi is not getting involved into these details. And in fact, we know the Rebbe always brings to our attention that when Rashi
does mention the name of the Tana or Amayra who says a specific pshat, it is because by mentioning his name, it adds to the pshat of what Rashi wants to say. So the question arises, why does Rashi tell us here, Menachem Pirush, that this Pirush was explained in the Pasuk by Menachem? So the Rebbe is learning, Menachem was an author of a Sefer who lived before Rashi, approximately around 150 years before Rashi. And Rashi in Chumash, in various places, refers to this Menachem and quotes Pirushim in his behalf. So when Rashi brings a Medrash, Rashi brings a Gemara, and Rashi doesn't tell us who says it or where it's said. So if the child who's learning Chumash wants to go ahead and look up the source of Rashi, child already knows that it is either a Medrash, it can be found in Medrash, it can be found in Gemara. More or less, if he will do a little bit of research, he will find where's the source of Rashi. Here, Rashi is bringing a Pirush, which is not mentioned neither in Gemara, neither in Medrash. It's something which is mentioned in a Sefer. In a Sefer which a regular child will not go to look up the Sefer which was written like close to Rashi, 100 years before Rashi. And this is a Pirush which is not a regular pshat, it's like a new introduction to the word Vayavik. So the child may want to look for the source, where did Rashi get this Pirush from? He could look in Gemara, he could look in Medrash, he'll look all over, and the child is not going to find it. So that's why Rashi here goes out of his regular rule, where Rashi Taka does not mention who is the person, who is the source of the specific pshat, because as long as it's negayat to pshat, Rashi tells it to us. What is negayat to pshat? Rashi says. What is not negayat to pshat, Rashi doesn't mention. But here, Rashi has to help the student. The student may want to know, where is the source of this pirush? Let me go ahead and find it. I want to know, where did Rashi get this from? And he could go and look all Midrashim and all Gemaras, and he wouldn't find it, because it's stuck not there. And who is the one that wrote it? An author of the Sefer that was a contemporary of Rashi. So Rashi tells the student, you should know, if you want to go and look up where's the source of this Pirush, it is brought in a Sefer, which was written by somebody by the name of Menachem. And Menachem Pirush, he introduces the Pshat that Vayavik does not just mean that they had a battle, the Malach and Yaakov, but Vayavik also stems from the word Avak, dust, because dust came up high. Dust was created through their battle, through the battle of the Malach and Yaakov. This brought about dust. Then the Rebbe discussed Rashi towards the end of the Sedre.
What was the answer to the first Rashi?
The answer to the first Rashi, Laila.
Yeah.
Simple, that even though Laila ends with a hey, still there are kolim in Lashon HaKodesh, words that end with a hey and are still not Lashon Nekeva, and Laila is one of them.
So how does Rashi telling the child about Menachem relate to the Pshat? It's just telling him where to go.
Rashi tells us the Pshat also.
What?
Rashi doesn't just tell us Menachem says a Pshat. Rashi quotes what Menachem says, but if you want to see more in detail what he says, you want to know the source of this Perush, go look it up in Menachem.
So when Rashi brings the name of the one who said it,
This is not a shir.
Now let us go to the end of the Sedre. In the end of the Sedre, there's a pasuk in Kapitel Lamed Vav, pasuk Lamed Aleph. And the Torah says, Ve'ela HaMelochem, these are the kings that have kinged for Edom. Edom meaning Esav. And Rashi gets into a whole interpretation that there were 8 kings ruling by Esav before kingdoms began by Bnei Yisrael. Shmoina hayu, there were 8. And Rashi, Knegdon Hamid Yankov, and Yaakov also had 8, Ubitl Malchus Esav b'yameim, and this destroyed the kingdom of Esav in its days. Ve'elohein, Rashi tells us who are the 8 kings which were by Yidden, which destroyed the kingdom of Esav, beginning from Shaul through Yehoshaphat. So first of all, the Rebbe is asking, for what need is it for Rashi to get into this whole interpretation? We're learning the Psukim. The Psukim are telling us all about Esav, and Esav's children, and Esav's family, and so forth. Here Rashi comes and tells us you should know that there were a total of 8 kings. And the Rambam says, by Yidden later there were also these 8 kings. And when they were by Yidden, they destroyed the kings which were by Yosef. So the Rebbe is answering this question. The child here is learning. He has learned Chumash until now. And he knows that Yaakov got from the Rebishter tremendous brachas. He also knows that Esav got brachas. However, the brachas of Esav are in no way are they a comparison to Yaakov. Yaakov got much stronger brachas from his father Yitzchak. He also knows that he has learned that before Yitzchak and Esav were born, Rivka went Lidrish as Hashem, and she was told, she went to inquire by the Beis HaMedrash, by the Rebishter, she was told that there are 2 nations, 2 opposites that she's going to give birth to. Kshezeh comes and Neifel, when one will rise, the other one will go down weaker. When the other one will go up higher, his brother will go down weaker. And here the child is learning all of these psukim. So first he learns about the whole family of Esav. So regarding the family of Esav, is as regarding Esav himself, it's a discussion whether he had a din of a Yid or he didn't have a din of a Yid. There's a Gemara. The Gemara tells us that Esav Yisrael Mumar Hoya, that Esav had a din of a Yid, but a Yid and not Pikoyres. However, Esav's children, they were definitely not Yid. They were not Yidden. So the question arises, why does the Torah elaborate and tell us all these details regarding Esav? Now comes to a question, not only that, but the Torah tells us the kings which were by Esav. Here the child is hearing, he hears that there was such a large family by Esav, and these were the tribes which were built by Esav. So the child is not asking any questions, because actually the Rebbe is asking, why doesn't Rashi explain, give reason why the Torah tells us all the details of his family? Rashi gives a reason why the Torah tells us all the kings Asher Malchu by Esav. How about the detailed explanation which the Torah tells us about the entire Esav family? Because the child who's learning Chumash, and he sees that Esav had a family, so many tribes and families and so forth, so the child will understand that if it is to Esav that way, Yaakov will definitely be blessed more. Because he knows that the main brachas were given to Yaakov. However, now he's coming across and he's learning, these are the kings which have ruled by Edom. So here the Rebbe brought out a very interesting thing, which we probably don't notice when we're learning Chumash. It says, let's start from the first king. Vayimlech be'Edom. Who ruled in Edom? Bela ben Be'er. Bela, the son of Be'er. V'shem Iroi, the name of his city was Dinhava. Then the pasuk goes on, Vayomas Bela, and Bela died. Vayimlech Tachtav, who was the king after him? Yovav ben Zerach, but he was from Botzor. And you'll notice every time the Torah tells us where the king was from. The Rebbe is learning a very interesting pshat. The Rebbe is learning these were kingdoms of Edom. However, the people who were the kings, the people who were the Melachim, they were not descendants of Esav. They were kind of like brought in from elsewhere, and they were the ones who ruled the country of Esav. Normally when we learn the Psukim, we don't even pay attention to it, but this is the pshat that the Rebbe introduced here. Why? Because Esav himself, like the bracha of Melachim Mechalotzecha Yitzeyu, the bracha that kings will come out of you, this bracha was given to Yaakov. Esav Taka had power. Esav who had a lot of power. But still at the same time, he was not productive to produce kings. The Malachim, these 8 Malachim, which we learn about, that they ruled by Esav, they ruled Taka there, but the Malachim themselves, they were from elsewhere. What does Rashi tell us? That there were 8 of them. And Yaakov also had 8. Connected Hamid Yankov 8, and he destroyed the 8 of Esav. When did it start by Yaakov? By Bnei Yaakov it started by Shaul, by the days of Shaul. So Rabbi is asking a very simple question. What do you mean to say? Let us analyze what's happening. There are 8 kings to Edom, 8 kings to Esav. Outsiders, fine, but they are still ruling for Edom. And how long are they lasting? Until the days of Shaul? Do you have an idea how many years this is? It's quite a few years from Yaakov and Esav's days until Shaul, who was the king before David. Can we say that 8 kings ruled such a long period? It's a question which arises in Pshat. So the Rebbe is learning, it doesn't mean that these 8 kings, they ruled for the entire period. In other words, and it went straight from one into another. That's impossible. Otherwise, every king would have had to rule for a very long time, when we can't learn that way. It means that spread over the period, until the Malchus of Shaul began, Esav had these 8 Malachim. But it doesn't mean that they went one after another. Because if they went one after another, then each one of them would have to be a king every one of them would have to be for a few hundred years a king. And this is definitely not the Pshat in the Pasuk. But the Torah is telling us that the child should know that even he sees that Esav had kings by him. Taka outsiders, but they came to rule for him. So the child who is learning Chumash kind of is like getting scared. He knows the Rebbe promised Yaakov, Malachim achalatzecha yitzeyu, that Malachim will be coming out of you. And he gave Yaakov such tremendous brachas. And here the child is learning and seeing that there were 8 Malachim by Esav, by Edom, even before they were by Yidden Malachim. So Rashi is comforting the student, don't worry. You should know that in later years, the Rebbe kind of did a move that he put up 8 kings by Yaakov, and they destroyed the Malchus Esav of Biyamei. The Rebbe concluded the Farbrengen. The main thing what counts is deed and action, and we should know that we are now a few days before Yutes Kislev, and next Shabbos will be the Shabbos after Yutes Kislev, which is within the 3 days of Yutes Kislev, and there's a concept of Lavud in Gemara and Halacha, the halachas of Sukkah. There's a concept, for example, if a wall is between the wall and the schach, or between the wall and the floor, there is missing 3 tvachim. So the Gemara tells us, we say lavud. Lavud means we imagine that these 2 things are tied together, even though there is a space between the end of the wall and the floor, so it's not a complete wall. So we say lavud, and we imagine that if the wall would be extended until the floor and there's no space there. Or the same between the schach and the wall. So the same the Rebbe is saying, the next Shabbos is a Shabbos which is lavud, because it's within 3 days, so it's really attached to Yutes Kislev. So it's a very special Shabbos, and let us also all keep in mind that from Shabbos, after next Shabbos, we are going into Chanukah. And Chanukah, there are a lot of things which you have to do on Chanukah, Riftzayim of Chanukah, and so forth. And definitely all of these things, when they are done with proper preparation, they are much more effective. That's why the Rebbe says the time to prepare for all of these things is we shouldn't postpone it, and we shouldn't delay things for a day later, and so forth. In fact, when he was talking earlier in the Farbrengen, when he was talking about the Inyan of Makeh Bepatish, he also stressed, a person may think he's going to go, there's an expression, statechne. Statechne means he's going to be very formal. And therefore, if he'll be formal, who says you have to rush today? Well, I wouldn't do it today, I'll do it tomorrow. If I don't get to do it tomorrow, I'll get to do it a day later. The Rebbe says, nowadays we cannot allow ourselves this luxury. Why? Because, who knows, maybe this specific act which we are to do, this specific act could bring to the coming of Mashiach. Memela, by what right do we have to postpone things? Everything has to be done right away, and we can't postpone. And here at the end of the Farbrengen, the Rebbe also said we should not postpone our preparations for Yutes Kislev, and particularly for Chanukah, but do all preparations, and then we will be successful in the mitzvah of Chanukah.